I never imagined a single morning routine could turn into the unraveling of everything I thought I understood about safety, family, and the quiet ways racism burrows into a life. It started in the cold dawn, when the street still held the silence of sleep. I walked toward my car, coffee in hand, thinking about the day ahead. Thinking about the errands I needed to run. Thinking about how normal everything felt. But normal vanished the moment I crouched down to pick up what I believed was a crumpled piece of paper near my front tire, and instead saw a small black device magnetized under the frame of my car. In that moment, time stretched, my palm grew cold, and the world sharpened into a single terrifying realization. Someone was tracking me. Not watching. Not monitoring. Tracking. I felt hunted without ever hearing footsteps behind me. I stood there, frozen. The chill seeping into my bones as I wondered who would do this and why I had become a target in a neighborhood where my existence already felt like an intrusion to some. My thoughts spiraled. Neighbors who never looked me in the eye. The lingering stares at the grocery store. The complaints about my son walking home from school a little too confidently. A tracker was not an accident. It was a message. Fear can either anchor a person or push them into motion, and I chose motion. I pulled myself together, wrapped the tiny device in a plastic bag, and made a decision that even I didn't fully understand at the time. I shipped it, across the border, across logic, across fear, straight to Canada, hoping that whatever signal it emitted would confuse whoever planted it, send them in the wrong direction, give me enough time to understand the danger stalking me. I didn't tell my son. He was 17, brilliant, kind, cautious in ways only a black boy raised in a world that watches him with suspicion learns to be. I didn't want to add one more fear to the pile he already carried. But the universe has a way of refusing silence. And the truth always circles back. The week that followed felt like walking on glass. I went to work, smiled, paid bills, cooked dinner, and every night lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening for sounds that weren't there. I monitored the news, the neighborhood watch group, even the traffic in front of my house, waiting for something to reveal itself. My mind repainted every interaction I'd had with certain neighbors. The man who once asked if I really lived here, because he'd never seen someone like me in this cul-de-sac. The woman who complained about my son's music even though her teenagers blasted theirs every night. The officers who had once followed me home only to say they thought my car looked out of place. Every memory became a suspect. Every silence felt loaded. But after a few days of nothing, a thin layer of normal returned. I almost began to convince myself I had overreacted. Maybe it wasn't meant for me. Maybe it wasn't what I thought. Maybe paranoia had gotten the better of me after years of swallowing subtle discrimination and pretending it never stuck to my ribs. But the illusion shattered on a quiet Sunday afternoon when my son's phone, lying on the kitchen counter, started ringing with a number he didn't recognize. I wouldn't have paid attention except his name flashed across the screen, and a sense of dread I thought I had outrun came slamming back. He picked up the phone casually, but the moment he lifted it to his ear, confusion washed over his face. He pulled it away slightly, staring at it like he didn't understand how or why someone was calling him from a number flagged as international. He hung up after a few seconds of silence, frowning, and said he heard nothing on the other end, just breathing. I felt my stomach twist. Whoever planted that tracker had been tracking him too. The realization hit me harder than anything else. I could handle being watched. I had learned to live in a world that kept its eyes on me with suspicion. But my son? My child who walked home with headphones in, believing music could drown out the ugliness in the world? My son who worked twice as hard to be seen as half as threatening? Fear turned into something far more dangerous, determination. I traced back every step, every detail, everything that had happened before the tracker was found. My mind kept circling around that neighbor who once asked too many questions about my son's routine. He had a way of smiling with his mouth, but not his eyes. Then there was the security guard at the strip mall who always followed us whenever we went shoe shopping, sometimes even writing down something in a small notebook clipped inside his vest. And then the argument 2 weeks earlier, when my son came home tense after an incident at school involving a teacher who accused him of skipping class when he had simply gone to the counselor's office. That teacher had made comments before, judging him by the size of his backpack, the slouch of his hoodie, the darkness of his skin. Small cuts that he shrugged off because he said he was used to it. But small cuts can bleed when nobody pays attention. The pieces weren't clear, but they were pointing toward one truth. Someone wanted to know where we went, when we moved, what we did, and how predictable our lives were. It wasn't random. It wasn't accidental. It was targeted. And it was racial. So I began documenting everything. Every suspicious car. Every unfamiliar sound. Every glance that lingered too long. I drove different routes to work, changed grocery stores, varied the times I left home. But despite my caution, something kept gnawing at me. The call to my son's phone had come too soon after the tracker was shipped. Whoever planted it realized quickly that the signal had moved far from where it should have been. And instead of chasing it across borders, they redirected their focus to the source. My son. Suddenly everything clicked into place with terrifying clarity. The tracker wasn't to watch me. It was to watch him. It wasn't paranoia but protection disguised as fear. Someone believed he was guilty. Of something he hadn't done, something he wasn't involved in, something racially assumed rather than proven. The next days were suffocating. I couldn't let my son walk anywhere alone. Couldn't let him go to school without watching the road until he disappeared inside. Couldn't sleep without checking the windows and doors a dozen times. And then came the morning when everything reached its peak. A black SUV idled at the end of our street. Tinted windows rolled up. Engine rumbling quietly like patience running out. It appeared for 2 days straight, always parked at the same angle, always leaving the moment I stepped outside. I reported it, but the officer on the phone sounded uninterested, telling me it was probably nothing, and suggesting I shouldn't jump to conclusions. The phrase echoed like mockery. Jumping to conclusions is what people had been doing to us for years. But the breaking point came when I found footprints near the back of my house. Size that matched a boot, not my son's sneakers, not my shoes. That was the moment fear fully transformed into absolute resolve. I gathered every photo, every note, every timestamp detail, and contacted a private investigator recommended by a coworker. He took everything seriously in a way authorities never had. Within days, he discovered something chilling. The tracker model was commonly used by private security agencies. And one such agency had been hired recently by a concerned parent from my son's school. Someone who believed my son was involved with the wrong crowd simply because he walked home with 2 other black boys. There had been a robbery in the neighborhood weeks prior, and instead of questioning their assumptions, they built an entire story around the boys they already feared. No evidence. No police involvement. Just racism dressed up as vigilance. When I learned the truth, anger consumed every corner of my being. Not just because someone spied on us. Not just because someone stalked my son. But because someone felt so entitled to their prejudice that they acted as judge, detective, and punishment all at once. They never asked. They never spoke to me. They never considered the consequences. They just assumed. They saw a skin tone and decided it meant guilt. The investigator exposed everything, documenting how the private security agency had tracked our movements, compiled a report about my son's daily route, even taken photos from a distance. Photos of my child walking home holding a smoothie. The invading presence, the calls, the SUV. They all made sense now. They were never searching for truth. They were searching for confirmation of a lie they desperately wanted to believe. When confronted, the parent behind it apologized in a way people apologize when they are only sorry they got caught. But I didn't accept their words. I didn't need their remorse. What I needed was accountability. And the investigator helped me file a formal complaint, pushing the case forward until the agency faced legal consequences, and the school was forced to address the racial profiling its community members encouraged. My son, quiet and strong, stood beside me through it all, processing the fact that he had been hunted for simply existing. When the dust settled, the SUV stopped showing up. The calls never returned. The neighborhood went quiet again. In a way, silence becomes when it has been forced to witness its own ugliness. Life resumed, but not untouched. Not unchanged. And even now, when I walk to my car, I check under it not out of fear but out of refusal to ever be blindsided again. The tracker in Canada became a symbol of how far people will go to disguise racism as concern. And in the end, I learned something I never wanted to learn. Sometimes the danger is not hiding in the shadows. Sometimes it is sitting in the house across the street, smiling politely, pretending safety is something only they deserve. But I also learned that exposing injustice isn't just about seeking justice. It's about forcing the world to see what it tried so hard to keep invisible. And I hope anyone listening asks themselves a question I had to confront. When danger arrived in your life masked as prejudice, would you recognize it before it reached your children, before it reached your home, before it tried to rewrite your story? Because fear didn't save us. Awareness did. And silence would have destroyed us long before the truth ever did.